Welcome to AnthroDish, the show about food, culture, and identity. I'm your host, Sarah Dugnan. One downside I find when I spend too much time on the internet is that there's an overwhelming viewpoint that the system is broken and there's not much that we can do to fix it, or that food in general is so disconnected from all other components in our lives. But I think these attitudes forget that there's a lot of empowerment that comes through advocating for better policies across the board. My guest today is someone who's absolutely legendary when it comes to that, Joshna Maharaj. Joshna sees food as our common denominator as humans and understands that it holds the power to solve many problems that we're facing. As she sees it, good food policy automatically means good health, agriculture, labor, and environmental relationships. Joshna is a chef, speaker, author, and activist who wants everyone to have a better relationship with their food. She believes strongly in the power of chefs and social gastronomy to bring the values of hospitality, sustainability, and social justice to the table. Joshna also works with institutions in Canada to build new models for food service. Her first book is entitled Take Back the Tray, and it captures the lessons and experiences from her work in changing institutional food systems across the globe. She is an enthusiastic instructor of both culinary and academic students, constantly finding ways to make food stories come alive for them. Joshna has also just started a master's in gastronomy in Dublin, Ireland, and is enjoying the delights of becoming a student once again. In our conversation today, we talk about how to tackle the prickliness of food policy and what happens when we break down the silos of industry, government, and hospitality to build better values and relationships around food. Here's my conversation with Joshna.
All right. Welcome to the show, Joshna. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm so well. It's really nice to be here with you.
Yes, it is so nice to have you here. I'm so excited for our conversation. But before we jump into all the stuff that we get to nerd out about together, do you mind sharing a bit of who you are, where you're coming in from today, and a snapshot of the type of work that you do?
Sure, I'm Joshna Maharaj. I'm a chef, author, and activist, and brand new grad student. And so I am now in my new home here in Dublin, Ireland. I've just moved here and I'm about to start a 2-year master's program in gastronomy and food studies, which is very exciting. This is it's like a branch off of the work that I've been doing most recently, teaching culinary students myself. That's sort of the last big bite that I've taken. Previous, as you know, was a lot of work as a chef in grassroots context, thinking through institutional food systems and deep sort of community food security. So now I have put on a new hat as a student, which I'm very delighted about.
Amazing. And I feel like it's only going to make everything that you do all that much more invigorating and powerful.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes, I hope so.
Awesome. Well, something that, in terms of like the work that you've done that I'm familiar with, is looking at food within more institutional lenses and how it's not always prioritized. So, do you mind speaking a bit to what happens when food is not a priority in certain spaces?
Yes, for sure. So when we say food is not prioritized in institutions, it generally means that it is just dismissed. It's not given any resources, no time, no money, no attention. Right? But and the spaces we're talking about are places like schools, hospitals, and prisons. Right? Those are sort of like the big three institutional spaces. And the problem there, I mean, look, I like to believe that our public institutions in some way are a reflection of who we are as a society, right? Particularly in the land of public education and public healthcare like we have in Canada. And so when you see the food systems that are inside, they don't necessarily reflect what we all would like to think Canadian values are, right? Or at least what we're told Canadian values are, right? And food is treated like an irritating necessity, right? In hospitals, it's like they're here overnight, so we have to feed them. Right? In prisons, it's the like, oh, they're here. And I mean, in prisons, it's even worse because they have somehow folded the food into the punishment of a person's time there, right? There's like an extra twist on the nastiness. And sometimes I really get so frustrated when we think about schools because I'm like, how are we going to build our young people? What are we teaching them? What are we telling them? And look, from a chef's perspective, my number one priority is hospitality, Always, always, always. And so when you look at the food service in a public institution as it currently is, the message through the lens of hospitality is, sorry, sucker, this is all your work.
Yeah.
Right? This is all
Yeah.
the effort, time, resources that you and your health, your education, your rehabilitation is worth. And to me, those are just like blaring sirens and red flags. And I suppose that is the chef inside of me that sees it. But I would like to argue that that is precisely why we need to see more chefs in these spaces, right?
Yeah.
Actually start making these connections and bridging these gaps.
Yeah, 100%. I think often, especially like within the school vein, I remember growing up, we had like a breakfast club program at our high
Right.
school, and it was fantastic, like for kids to come in and, the kids that were in nutrition courses were the ones that were like making the food the day before, and
Even
people
better.
could come in.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, now it's like my mom was a school secretary, and she was like, sometimes we cobble together some like cheese strings for kids, but there's a lot of people that's a place where, you want them to be well fed and energized. And
Well,
as you
and
said,
listen, to your point and to your mom's point, we also need a recognition about what's happening in the world outside of the school, right? One of the most jarring stats that I have seen in the last, say, 10-ish years is the fact that the home is no longer a child's primary source of nutrition, right? That is a shocking bit of truth that, you know what I mean? We have to sort of think through unpacking. But now it's the school, right? And we saw this during lockdown, that wildly the thing that kids missed more from school was the free meal that came and not so much the education.
yeah.
Right? And that blew my mind to watch that reality in front of us. And so there just the disconnect between how kids' lives are outside of the doors of the school, right? And understanding what it means. Teachers see it because that's how a lot of Ontario, anyhow, breakfast programs came together, because teachers were starting to buy granola bars and right, and cobble together a little something so these kids could sit still and pay attention in class.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's alarming. It's also, I think, speaks to a broader kind of public shift, I find. And I'm curious to hear your opinion about it. But, you're seeing a lot more Canadians thinking about food and thinking about, food cost is kind of top concern making headlines, but food quality too. So I'm curious to get your perspective on, what's driving this and what sorts of policies have kind of allowed for this sort of dynamic to unfold as we're seeing it play out.
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. And I think the most important answer is that it is an alarming lack of policy that has allowed this to happen, right? We just, in this last federal budget, Justin offered $1 billion over 5 years for a national school food program, right? Hallelujah, right? It
Yeah.
is the first bit of food policy that we have in Canada, right? We have shamefully been the only G7 nation without a national school food program, never mind any other real legislation around food, right? It is shocking how unplugged our governments are at all three levels. Governments are just really, really disconnected from food, which is precisely what allows things like we're currently seeing with rampant corporate abuse of their power, right? Because a lack of food policy is what has allowed such mega monopolies on our distribution and our food system, right? And so now you have literally, it's like three big outlets, right? Three big delivery mechanisms, and the folks at the helm have all of the power. And they are using it. They are fleecing us, right?
Yeah.
Shopping for food is outrageously expensive. And and even when they get dragged to Ottawa, there's little to no accountability, because we have no standard to point to that says food in Canada should be this. Canadians eat. I mean, even if we could point to Canada's food guide,
Yeah.
right? Even if we could say all of the things or the recommendations in that guide always need to be affordable.
Yeah.
Right? I think
Yeah.
I've paid attention to this for a while, and I think that the current version, 2019, was the last time we saw an update. And I think it's the best one we've seen yet.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
Right? Where you can
Yeah.
see that the milk and meat lobby has been pulled out, because previously it was just like red meat was your only source of protein and dairy was your only source of calcium. So great. And even the physical document has pictures of real food, and there's conversation about cooking with other people and sharing a meal around a table, right? And more culturally diverse ideas. But still, the missing piece is, ideally, if this is the food that our federal government says all Canadians need to eat for optimal health, whatever, however we understand that, somebody who is living on social assistance in this country should be able to afford that diet. And that is
100%.
very much not the case. And again, because we have no connection, right, to what it means to eat well, right, and to have some kind of standard around food. So that is, I think, what is really, because it's just, there's a rampant misuse and exploitation, right, of people that's happening right now. And that is crazy. We should have much more protections. It seems insane to me that a country as essentially rich and wealthy and developed as Canada has such a precariousness around food security.
Yeah. It's always surprising to me when you like really take stock of the bigger picture of Canada versus other nations around food. And I'm curious to get your perspective of like why we're so siloed when it comes to food policy in relation to, agriculture or to labor rights or to other elements. Is it because people are missing in these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so, right? This is a thing that I honestly bang my head against the wall to try and figure out. I don't get it, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand it. I make a habit every year of reading the Federal Minister of Agriculture's annual report just to see what they're thinking about. You know what I mean? And a couple of years ago, I think this was probably during lockdown, was the last time I said every year, but during lockdown was probably the last time I did. And importantly, the image on the cover of the annual report was a crop duster.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Important, right?
Yeah.
And then I did a keyword search of the document, some 30-something pages, and I did a keyword search for food security. And that phrase is nowhere in the document.
No kidding.
The Federal Minister of Agriculture, right? It's not.
Yeah.
That portfolio seems to just think about agribusiness and our exports. When really, if I had it my way, we would have a clause that said that all the food that we grow in Canada primarily first goes to feed Canadians, and then whatever the surplus is, we can start selling to other people. Right? But we cannot. It just seems so insane to me. Why we're selling food when we have hunger, right? Hunger at like shocking and rising rates. It is. I mean, I pitched the idea of chatting about policy around food because things are getting more and more and more tenuous. And I don't understand what it is about the issue of food that we cannot seem to break politicians on. You know what I mean? We cannot seem to crack into this. Right? We are pre-pandemic. Our national food insecurity was like 16 to 19%. Right? And now it's like 22, 23%. Right? Even more shocking is the fact that when we were at the 16 to 19%, it jumped to 52% for northern community.
Yeah.
Right? And so now we're seeing some indigenous communities, particularly those in the north, are at like 95, 98% childhood food insecurity.
Grim.
I'm like, what are we doing? What is this all about? Right? I don't understand why this is such a void. Right?
No,
One dream scenario would be that our federal government smartens up and understands that we need a federal ministry of food.
Yeah.
Right? With a minister at the helm who is incredibly interdisciplinary, because they will have to talk to every other minister. Right? That is sort of the beauty, I think, of food, is that good food policy that respects people and land and, all the ways that we want to think about this, automatically means good labor policy, good health policy, good agriculture policy, right? If you build it well, you'll take care of the land, the jobs will be good ones, people will be healthier, steadier access, you know what I mean? Trade. it will all flow. And that's not even my wisdom. That's the Toronto Food Policy Council. And
Right.
other people much smarter than me on this subject. I've sort of adopted it and run with it, There is a huge opportunity for a Ministry of Food, and particularly from a health, right?
Yeah.
This is a
Yeah.
piece that we have to really start talking about.
100%. And that makes me think too, there's some researchers coming out of University of Guelph who put out a report or study, I think it was like last month, where they were looking at like how we even look at the idea of determining food cost in Canada.
Yeah.
And they were saying, a lot of the reports are coming from like StatsCan or from government funded reports, and they're missing big chunks of what contributes to food cost or what contributes to the idea of it. So the big one is, not talking about climate change, not talking about grocery and industry kind of influence on food cost or different price fixing schemes and things like that too. It just strikes me contributing to what you're talking about too, right? Where we have all of these like fracturing of the food system.
Totally.
And in some cases we have parts of our food production being made here, sent off to the States, and then brought back here.
Or China, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no slate to China. It's just way too far away,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. By the
It's
time food
crazy.
gets back here.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, and then you see the produce. Like I constantly think about like the abundance of produce that we've seen like rotting either in grocery stores or in farmers' fields,
Yeah.
and like so I think the point that you say too of like when you have good food policy, it translates across the board. I'm kind of curious if you can kind of speak to that a little bit more about what happens when you have good food policy that's valuing food. What happens to these?
So an example of what that would be is that if we said, right, even if we anchor it in whatever the advice in something like Canada's food guide is, this is the collection of food that we believe is important for Canadians to have access to for a good life, right? Or a good Canadian life, however we, articulate that. The trickle down of policies like that are things like potential subsidies on those ingredients. Maybe there's 12 ingredients that there are federal subsidies on so that they are always very affordable and accessible to everybody. Great, right? Then we know they're untouchable, right? And there's some reliability in the fact that people will always be able to afford milk, bread, vegetables, however we understand all of that. That could be one way. Another piece is that it can be a wall, because now we have the industrial food system led by corporate greed, essentially, that has no barriers. They don't hit a wall anyway, right? With price or the depth of processing on food and the manipulation of the food, there is nothing that says they have gone too far, right? There's no
Yeah.
wall to hit.
Yeah.
And I saw this so much in my hospital work.
Mm,
Right? The
yeah.
dietitians are professionals whose task is about really determining nutritional needs for people who need to heal, not even just regular folks, right? These are people who need to heal. And they have been completely professionally compromised, right? And they have to just sit and sort of agree to whatever they're given to serve to patients as being nutritionally adequate, right? Because there's no barrier. There's no like, nope, you can't do this to the food, right? I don't know who this lies with the FDA partially, but again, who is controlling the FDA, right?
Yeah.
Who is setting their priorities? Who is putting walls up, or just creating the perimeter within which they have to play, as it would be, right? We don't have any of these barriers, and that is really the thing. So that there's a sort of it's sort of rampant and uncontrolled. Or at least, listen, I feel like people might hear this and say, well, it is controlled to some degree. Let's just say that is insufficient,
Yes.
right? And it's too wide. It needs to narrow in a little bit
Yes.
more, right? That is the
100%.
problem, right? We don't see these types of things. Like other pieces too, I've been doing a really interesting project around food prescribing,
Okay.
right? And using food in a preventative way, right? And particularly with a focus on reducing the burden on the healthcare system in the future. Right? So an
Okay.
example
Yeah.
of this is like a diabetic gets steady access to the kind of food that they need to eat to manage their blood sugar levels and keep themselves steady so as to prevent multiple trips to the ER or even potentially a lifetime on insulin or medications. It's sort of pulling back on the burden on the healthcare system. Let's invest in getting nutritional access to things, and then off we go, right? And we see this. It makes so much sense. But the current reality of how we understand health is we just deal with the end side. You know what I mean? We just deal with the problems, right? We are so disease focused and not at all thinking through what steps can we take to ensure that everybody has access to the tools that they need to keep themselves well enough. That's really it, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Like the preventative measures that you can take through food. And like again, there's the food piece and then the access to medicine piece and the access to care. But I think as you say, like you really highlight the power that you can bring to healing and to preventative care when people can afford and access food. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot more people struggling with too, is like even just feelings of having to negotiate what food is coming home in the cart.
Well, and there is a correlation between, if we look at the health conditions that are the biggest burden on the healthcare system, it's things like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, right? All of which are things that can be better managed with diet intervention, right? That reality is very much there. It's not to say if everybody is having some sort of bone problem or some sort of
Right.
muscle problem, you know what I mean? Or something like that. Like these are all things, even a lot of this neurological stuff that we're seeing with anxiety and ADHD, food sources and the kinds of food that we're eating play significantly into the management of these things. And we are just, and I think we can argue that a lack of access to these to good, honest, wholesome food is contributing to the growth, right, of these conditions in so many people. And so that's why it feels it feels like it's getting increasingly alarming and a thing that we have to start looking.
Yeah, 100%. So in your perspective, who needs to be at the table to have these food policy discussions that may not be there now or may not have historically played a huge role in these discussions?
Really, it's government, right? And because of the way health and education are managed in Canada, we need the province and we need the federal government with us, right? And it's really important. This point is really important because so many times what we get from government and from policymakers is like, show us the evidence, do a pilot project. That's all been done, right? It has all been done. All the low-hanging fruit has been collected.
Yep.
We have it all in a basket, in a bunch of lovely reports that you can read, right? They sort of just kick the can down the road by saying, show me feasibility studies, show me, pilot projects. They're all done. They're all done, right? And all the answers point back to investing in food. It's as simple as that, right? It's as simple as that. And the thing too is that we have evidence of the benefit and usefulness of this in so many countries, right? The UK is on top of this. The US, in the US, they have just like collectively, there's been an investment of $8 billion in the idea of food prescribing.
Wow.
Right. And
That's
one of
huge.
the craziest stories that I've heard is a colleague who went to a food is medicine conference. Tufts University has been taking a lot of leadership, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Really interesting. But one of the keynote speakers was from JP Morgan, right, which is a banking outfit, but they are the umbrella under which Manulife Insurance lives.
Okay.
Right. And this dude, I think, was the man at this microphone, was saying that they are investing in food prescribing because this is what is going to keep people alive longer so that they can continue paying their insurance premiums and they can delay the need to pay out upon death. So it is a dirty capitalist kind of reason, but it's important for us to recognize that if even they have understood that food is what's going to keep people alive longer, come on, everybody, right? And
Yeah,
even these folks see it. It's a shocking bit of truth in terms of how they understand, and they are exclusively profit-driven populations. But if even they see this, it is definitely something that the rest of us need to start paying attention to, right? We just have to do it. I don't know. Sometimes I think that I don't know, Canada, our vision about things is really off
it
somehow. I
is.
don't
It
know
is.
what it is, right? It
No.
is off.
I'm wondering, like, I was speaking to someone about that recently, where we were just kind of looking at, I don't know, like the lack of creative vision
Yes.
in Canada that seems to kind of persist across these, because as you said, like there's a lot of evidence, there's a lot of people, and yeah, if you can get the economists and the
Totally.
the stats guys to
Well, the
start
dirty
taking
insurance
notice.
people are saying this. I mean,
Oh my
what are
gosh.
we gonna go on?
Yeah, and it feels like food has always been on the back burner more as like an economic export rather than like a very real nourishing component to the everyday Canadian life.
Well, the only thing that I can say, or that the only thing that makes sense, is if we explain it by saying that there is actually no real understanding of the role that food plays in
Mm,
somebody's life, right? Food is treated as some sort of luxury,
yeah,
right? When I was saying, I was like, just imagine how ludicrous this conversation would seem if we were talking about access to air and water.
yeah,
And really, listen, the water piece is not that far away.
it's getting there. Yeah,
The water pieces, we can see it. It's just down the road. And we live with abundance, and so it's perhaps not as alarming for us in Canada. But how insane would it be for us to have this many councils and meetings and organizations to confirm and demand for better access to air for everybody to breathe,
yeah,
right? We just don't get that food is not a luxury, right? Food is the thing that we need to stay alive, which is why everything has this food related bit, right? Is our common denominator as human beings is access to food. And that is for the part of the huge problem and the delightful opportunity, right?
yeah,
That's why I like to say, and this is again, this Charter Food Policy Council, not me, it is the most tidy and efficient way, right? If this all feels so overwhelming with all the problems that we're dealing with in the world, let's start with the food.
yeah.
Start with the food, and everything else will slowly start to rebuild. It's just, there's a way through this. And that's what has me continuing to shake my fist in the air and yell and scream.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh yeah, all of these really complicated problems, we can center on this, because
That's
this
it.
is the center of so many discussions, so many papers, so many reports, so many, as you said. I'm curious too, because like your work is incredibly empowering, very motivating, and it's very solutions, tangible,
Thank
practical.
you.
There's no like high theory kind of
I'm
question,
delighted to hear that. Thank you.
which is really nice, because it's one of those things where I think quite often people kind of circle the drain of like, well, how are we going to fix this? And
Totally.
you're
Circle the
right
drain
through
is a
it.
beautiful way to talk about it. That's exactly it. And it's been a real process for me because I am an ideas person. That's perhaps
Mhm.
obvious at this point. And this work has forced me to pull myself down to be like, okay, exactly how is this going to look? What are we going to change? How are we going to pay for it? What is going to happen? You know? And listen, Sarah, to that point, the how are we going to pay for it is the question that always comes up,
Right.
right? Always, always, always is how are we going to pay for it with hands on hips and eyes rolling and all
Yeah.
of this
Yeah.
kind of, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think that is entirely the problem. Is if we want to keep shoehorning this and forcing this into some economic model when it should not. Let the record show it should not have to make good business sense to feed people
Mm. Yeah.
right? And people are constantly, when I started in institutions, particularly because I started in hospitals first, I had so many business people excited about a model that I was going to come up with to do the, you know what I mean? They're like, let me know when you're ready to make the business case. And I was like, it will never happen. I am never going to make the business case for feeding people good food in a hospital. Never. Because that automatically suggests that there's profit connected. And there
Yeah,
should not be profit connected to feeding people properly in a country, in a hospital, in a school, in a prison. Those things should be untouchable, right?
100%. And it sets a precedent too, right? Like if you were to put forward a business proposition for or a business model for this, then it makes it okay in the future and to continue.
Exactly. Because the floodgates are open. I was like,
Yeah.
I am never going to
No.
participate in that. Not anything with my name on it, right?
Yeah,
Somebody else
yeah,
might, but definitely
yeah.
nothing with my name.
So how do you get through to that sort of person? Like for people that are listening and they might have similar sorts of negotiations, be it at their school or at the place that they work, how do you get through past food as money, food as business to the heart of the matter for people?
So I would say that fortunately, we have so many beautiful examples of how well it works when somebody has the vision to build it well. Right? Even just simply like, look, I'll use an example from my own work, but I'm definitely not the only player here. There are many. I have a wonderful community of colleagues who are working. But there's this example that I talk about in the book about cookies on the catering trays at the university cater, right? Well, it was the now Toronto Metropolitan University
Mm.
catering, and we had cookie platters that we just made endless volumes of. But the cookies were not good, and they were too big, and people would break them in half, and nobody would pick up that half, so then it got wasted. And I called the company to say, hey, can you give us a smaller cookie? And they were like, nah, the machine only does this one thing. And I'm like, all right, fine. So then I called a local friend who was a baker, who had a bakery, and I said, I have 66 cents to spend. I can't spend any more. Can you give me this size cookie with better ingredients, more wholesome ingredients, more locally sourced ingredients? She was like, what? 66 cents. So she showed up in a couple of days with 5 flavors, right? All using local grains and horizontally traded chocolate and Ontario butter,
Nice.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
all of the dreamy things we want,
Yeah.
right? And so then we started buying those cookies. Right, first we bought like, I think it was like 1,000. No, it was like 500 cookies, and then it rolled to 1,000 cookies a week. Right, and then when we got to convocation, when we had all the students and their parents in the fancy little receptions, we had ordered like 10,000 cookies from this woman,
Wow.
right? And the point being, she all of a sudden had a much busier shop, and she posted photos on her Instagram of like her son and her son's girlfriend rolling cookie dough and filling boxes, you know what I mean?
Awesome.
And all
Yeah.
that kind of sweetness. But then I'd go to the farmer's market, and the dude who owns the chocolate company that she was buying from was like, oh my God, thank you. The people who run the cheese that her cheesecakes were coming were like, hey, thanks for that order, right? The trickle down of that
Yeah.
is really where the magic is. We can, in fact, use our food spend, even though I don't like to commodify this, but we can thoughtfully use our money to support local food systems, more sustainable food systems, right? We were able to keep so many wonderful folks in business, right? And because I had a substantial order, right? Well, every month they knew that was a big chunk of an order,
Yeah.
right? That they could exhale a little bit. They could buy some new equipment. They could take a vacation. They could not have to be such scrappy hustlers,
Yeah.
right? Because there was finally room in a place like an institution for their food. And this, like, we can do this. We have examples all around. The folks at Community Food Centers Canada are beautifully illustrating this, right? They work in the most humble scenarios for super, super vulnerable folks, right? Who come and just eat their meals. We're talking community lunches mostly, right? But they have some values behind the food that they buy, in as much as they're able to with their own sort of very limited, thin budgets, right? But we're seeing they're able to make deep farm connections and keep agricultural businesses afloat, right? And ideally, right, push through this stigma of feeding folks in this context some more wholesome, nutritional, better food that can sort of break those cycles a little bit, right? We can do this. We've seen this happen. There's evidence all over the place, right? In fact, I heard about this wonderful hospital in Montreal, right? I don't remember the full name, but I can easily send you a link for show notes.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, where they're using the hospital cafeteria as a good food space. So the prescription that people get is just some money loaded on a card so that they can go into the hospital cafeteria and choose a meal for themselves. But what is wonderful about that is that there is, again, some values guiding the food preparation, right? So there's a little, it's more wholesome, more thoughtful, but also sourced from within. This is Montreal, so it's, from suppliers, farmers within Quebec, right? To sort of keep all of that going. There's a way, it just seems so crazy, but there's a way for us to take care of each other,
Yeah.
right? We can work together and take care of each other this way, right? And look, it's wonderful in what you can animate, right? But I have also seen the other side of this where I build these interconnected networks that work so well. And then all of a sudden, the people at the helm lose their appetite for this and they shut the project down, which is what happened. And everything felt like dominoes, right? And that was it's still a thing that hurts my heart to think about all
Yeah.
those terrible emails that I had to send apologizing for pulling them into this nonsense in the first place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because when it fell, it all came tumbling down. And the point is, we are more connected than we realize, right? This is a thing. Pandemic scarcities were a perfect illustration of all of this, right? This is just about the way human behavior works. This is not, it doesn't have to be anything fancier than that, right? There is evidence of this. And so we just, it's like, I remember there was Jamie Oliver, glorious, wonderful Jamie Oliver. He did this bit about school food in the UK
Oh, yeah.
years
Yeah.
ago now, right? And he has
Yeah.
easily been a role model for me and my work. But with all of his celebrity and all of his loud advocacy, the moment the change happened was when he served the Minister of Education that terrible meal.
Yeah.
That was when it all changed, right? Was when they were like, oh,
Yeah.
this
Had
is
to
what
eat what they were serving.
right. Right? Oh, right. That's what it all. So it's isolation and distance,
Yeah.
right? That is really preventing these connections from happening.
Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic point. And I really like the idea of being able to pull examples and use those as a motivating factor, particularly when you're overwhelmed. Like if you're just seeing the headlines of what's happening with food,
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to fall into that trap. And I think seeing your work, seeing the examples that you're able to pull out, those are the sorts of things that, again, can inspire different visions and different kind of thought, especially in a country where we have one cell phone company and like two grocery stores or whatever. I think that's the important part to remember is, as you said, like really disrupting that and thinking about the local and how everyone is so connected can radically change like how you think about it and then how you go forward with that too.
Yeah. Listen, during the early days of quarantine, I remember a friend of mine who educated person, making good living to, you know what I mean? Educated
Yeah.
professional people said to me that because farmers and farmers markets were all shut down. And so farmers were setting up these kind of crazy in the parking lot box pickup situations for people to order online and then just pick up a box safely distanced or, whatever wonderful thing they sorted out. But this guy was on the phone with me and he was, Joshna, you can buy food directly from the farmer. And I was like, welcome to the party, my friend. Right? And I was like, how did that feel? He was like, it was amazing. You can just do this. And I was like, yes, wonderful. Enjoy your good food. But also I was like, my God.
Yeah.
Right? This is a smart, aware, thoughtful person who does not understand that there is a way to opt out. Right? There's another way that you can get your food and that farmers are like real people who
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
call
Yeah.
and talk
And who
to
have
and buy.
Instagram pages too.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's so amazing to me, right? And I was like, huh, okay. Right. I think I remember hearing somebody say that people need to hear things at least 5 times before the information actually settles in. Right. And I was like, that's when I remember thinking, I could probably just sail on this message for the rest
Yeah.
of my life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think,
Totally.
okay, it's done. I wrote a book. Great. What's next? Let's move on. What's the new idea? What's the bit? But the truth is, and when I look at people who I love so much, food people, right? There's Alice Waters, is a chef in California who I love so much. When I look at it, I realize Alice has been saying the same thing for like the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
Right? And sometimes I'm like, oh, that just feels like, oh my God. But at the
Yeah.
same time, this is what is required. It's the consistency and that messaging and be like, nope, back to the food, back to the food. Let's get back to the food one more time.
One more time for the next 40 to 50
That's
years.
right.
And
I'm
then,
like,
yeah.
okay, all right, okay.
No, but I think that's really important, particularly in a place where we have so much technology constantly driving our urges to do new, to do bigger, better, whatever. Yeah, I think having that repetition, having something to ground in, to kind of like to do the like touch grass thing,
Totally, right?
with
Plus,
your
I
message.
say too, I like it's to me, I like one of my sort of quiet moments when I think about what the heck I am doing, right? Because it just feels like, am I really going to say the same thing over and over again? But the point is, we like we're so obsessed with the what's next,
Yeah.
right? That we are now in this insane situation where we all walk around with these high-powered computers in our pockets, right? With the capacity to do such extraordinary things, right? The fact that I can just send a nonsense run of emojis to my brother who lives in Bangkok, just about some stupid joke about a, you know what I mean? It's like just
Yeah.
nonsense, but we giggle and that's fun. But to imagine that that's the case, yet we have figured out how to do that, but we have still not figured out how to make sure that everybody on this planet gets at least one meal every day before they sleep. Right? We have not figured that out. And we need to temper boastfulness, right, about our technological advancements, remembering that we have not figured out how to meet basic human needs for everybody on this planet yet. Right? And that is not because it's not possible, it is because we have chosen not to. Right? Hunger is not a production issue. It is a distribution issue. It's an economic issue. It is not about we can't grow enough food for the number of people. I don't care what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? It's politics. It's politics and money that does that. And we should be ashamed of that. Like we should, you know what I mean? The inconsistency of that should be much more glaring for us than it is.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think, yeah, like I love how to the point you are with that message, because it can't be said enough. Clearly, it needs to be said again and again. And I honestly, I could talk with you all day, but I'm realizing we're also hitting our
my
time.
gosh, the time really flew. So
I know.
Amazing.
Do you mind sharing where folks can check you out online or resources that you'd encourage them to check out? If they want
That's amazing. Thank you.
Go forward.
I think because I have narrowed down my life in Canada and moved to the other side of the Atlantic, things are a bit quieter. But at Joshna Maharaj is where I am on Instagram. You can catch me there. I am actually, as we speak, I am working on building an online course about rebuilding institutional food systems.
Amazing.
Wonderfully, I'm seeing momentum. Ironically, when I leave the country is when the momentum starts. But regardless, here we are. And I'm not there necessarily in Canada to dive into these projects. So I thought, look, I still have all this intel that is still very relevant. And so I'm starting to build a course that will be 6 units long. And in fact, just this afternoon, I've been working on the building values-based procurement strategies for public institutions. And really thinking through how to do that and what that looks like. So keep your eyes and ears peeled for that. Otherwise, I can tell you, Take Back the Tray is the book. This is going to be called Take Back the Tray Classroom, which I'm really excited about. But that's the book that I love. And I think that she got a slow start into the world because I released it in May 2020, which
Yeah, I
was
always forget
a
about
little heartbreaking and not the right time for that. But it's cool. It's a slow burn.
slow burn growth.
And she's out there, and I am so thrilled to know that you are using it and sharing it, and students are connecting with it. That is a dream come true. It's wonderful. But there are so many organizations doing, and particularly around the excitement around building, using the money that we've got from the federal government to build a national school food program. Right, all wind to the backs of these gorgeous folks who are doing this. And we're going to hopefully start seeing some better food for our kids and some better health outcomes for communities.
100%. Well, Joshna, thank you so much for taking the time amidst the, all the things that you've got going on. It's always such a pleasure to read your work and now to get to chat with you about it too.
Amazing. My happy pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for listening, everybody. If you want to do something and if you're like, where can I start? What can I do? Just look at the people around you. Right? Our future, the thing I know for sure is that our future and the way through all of the mess is going to be about thoughtful networks of people, small, local networks of people who care about each other. That's it. Make a pot of something, share it with other people. Like that's, where harvest time is upon us. Like that is a legitimate thing. Making a meal and sitting around a table is now a political act. And it's a way to resist. So do that. It means something. And it's easily a great place to start.
That was Joshna Maharaj. I've linked her book Take Back the Tray and her social media in the show notes below if you want to follow along and learn more. You can also find all of this at our website at AnthroDish.com under episodes. Thanks for listening to AnthroDish Podcast. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you like the show, please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts to help get the word out. For more AnthroDish, you can sign up for my newsletter at sarahduignan.substack.com or find me on TikTok, Instagram, or Facebook at AnthroDish Podcast. I always love hearing from you and what you're thinking about food. AnthroDish is produced in partnership with the American Anthropological Association. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you